Okay, we are Team Statistical Studs, Cameron Doty, Dylan Murphy, Zach Tendler, Jan Zakowski, and this is our Project 4. So starting with the definition of explosive play, by looking at a couple different sites, Pro Football Focus, the NFL, a lot of them cited an explosive play as 10 plus yards on the ground or for a rushing play, and then 20 plus yards for a pass play as an explosive play. So that is how we framed our data, starting with offense.
Okay, so for offense, we start gathering some basic info. First, we of course filtered the explosive plays, so we got overall 59 explosive plays, 22 on one side, 37 on the other side. Uh, and then we ran some basic, essentially pivot tables through summarize function in the R studio, just to see how many, what was the explosive rate on passes, what was the explosive rate on rushes, and how was it per down. And then we also looked a little more in depth into comparing how many of or what was the explosive rate difference in between the passing and rushing, which we found out that technically, for example, or based on data, for example, it would be better to rush on the first yard and pass on second, third, and if then fourth as well.
So yeah, my first stab into the data set really was to run regressions. By the time, I got to the end and got to all our results, I think, myself and our group mates here, we kind of realized that running regressions for wasn't really the right idea for a binary outcome like explosive or not explosive plays. With just 59 explosive plays in a data set of over 800 plays, it makes explosives basically too rare to run linear regressions for. So, I mean, this was kind of a situation where like the process wasn't the greatest and might not be the most correct way to go about it, but it still nonetheless did give us some insights that we could glean from. So, while the vast majority of the variables that we ran regressions for, produce insignificant stats, three variables actually did. With low p-values and positive coefficients, which indicated that these three variables were statistically significant, in that like the variable does ex affect explosives, and that each of these three variables increases the probability of an explosive play. So these three variables that satisfied both conditions were the over route, the post route, and the dolly formation, which I believe segues pretty well into Jan's next section.
Yeah, so as Zach said, Dolly formation was the most explosive one, or with the highest explosive rate overall. Uh, for the formation, explosive rate pivot table, we actually filtered or adjusted the data a little bit because we discovered that for in the formation field or in the formation column, over 200 cases weren't filled out. So through a different field of formation, we essentially managed to filter out and connect the exact same formations that weren't filled out and lower the empty cases to 46, which also then changed significantly outcomes for some of the formations like tribe, because only twice the tribe was filled out in the formation field, but actually it was run many more times, which actually showed a better or more accurate rate for the formation. Then we also looked at the ball carriers as individual players. We've seen that players 15, 80, and 80 had the highest explosive rate with a decent amount of passes. And then if we look in the next slide on the specific per down situations for those numbers, we can see that actually number 84 was the most explosive, but with many less overall plays, because we can see that out of his 8 plays, 3 were explosive, so very close to 50%. However, for 15, the explosive rate was spread across a lot of plays, and for example, uh, 3 out of 17 on second down is not that great of a number. Then we looked on how the defense affects the explosive rate for us and which coverages work the better, but essentially uh, we can see in the outcomes the things we would kind of expect with cover zero being the most explosive, which through football makes sense. But we also looked, I will not go in detail in this, but you can see that we went through the specific routes as well based on the coverages, which also positively like correlates with what Zach mentioned earlier with the positive outcomes of the regressions. And then of course we checked also a more of a basic information again, but we found that passes to the right were more explosive overall comparing to the left and to the middle, uh, and as well as that the bigger drawbacks by the quarterbacks led to higher explosive rate for passing, which also is kind of interesting. However, 17 out of 180, uh, we can see that most of the time the dropback was 7 steps. Um, Explosive pass rate on depending on play action, which could be expectable, but play action was more explosive overall. And yeah, lastly, we also checked the pass rate by backset, uh, which showed us that dot was very explosive, uh, and that overall we focused a lot, or Temple focused a lot on running the gun formation or the gun back sets with 274 cases of gun strong and 165 cases of gun weak.
So moving on to the run game, we just like the passing game, wanted to kind of see some more general trends, service level trends. So explosive run by down, first down was the most prevalent. Explosive run by personnel type, we found that the majority was in 12 or two tight end sets. So at least off the jump here on first down, and then in two tight end sets, that was going to be a raise in explosive plays. Then we moved to what the defense was giving us. So explosive run by coverage, cover three and cover four seemed to be the defenses where we were most likely to have an explosive run. And then similarly, when there was six or seven players in the box, that was when there was the most explosive runs compared to when there were more people in the box, eight or nine, and also less players in the box, five. Moving on to defensive package. So a vast majority, 19 out of 22 rushes, explosive rushes, were against nickel coverage, where two and one times they were against base and dime coverage respectively. And then shotgun formation led to a vast majority of the explosive runs as well. Explosive runs by backset again, just like we did for the passing game. Gun strong seemed to be the majority of runs that led to an explosive run in terms of backset. And then looking at explosive run by concept, this is one that we really wanted to dig into. So actually going to move on to the next slide with that same graph in the corner. Inside zone produced a ton of explosive runs, followed by counter and power, and so on and so forth. Want to do a little bit more looking into that. If you look at the bottom chart there, the share of explosive plays versus the share of total rushes, we found some pretty interesting kind of patterns. So, counter and draw could have been ran a bit more. It seemed like there was more, they made up more of the explosive play percentage than they did of actual rushes. And then on the opposite side, inside and outside zone made up more of the share of total rushes than they did the share of explosive plays. So that was somewhere the kind of start with a pattern for our recommendation section. And then after that, we wanted to see not just concept, but who was getting the ball. So at first, it was obvious that 23 was the main ball carrier with almost triple of the rushes of the person behind him. He had the most explosive plays. He had the largest share of explosive runs, and he also had almost the highest runs per carry, or yards per carry, excuse me. But then after that, we wanted to kind of start melding the two, both run concept and player, to see if we can maximize some explosive plays. So we used EPA, or expected points added. So the way we made these charts was that in green, if you had a green box, that means that within that concept, you had a higher either average yards, average expected points per attempt, or expected points added, excuse me, or percentage of positive EPA. So just going by just the visuals, number 23 was not only the leading rusher, but he also was the most effective by far. A ton of green on that chart. Number 28, who was the second leading rusher, opposite a ton of red on that chart. In his highest attempts for inside zone, he was productive, but aside from that, there was some below on the team average in every single row. 16, even though he had 24 less rushes than the number two rusher, was kind of almost the opposite, the exact opposite. Had green in every row, so he was hitting above average in every single concept, whether it be per average yard, for expected points added, or for percentage of positive expected points added per play. Moving on to number 29, who had almost the exact amount of runs as number 16, he had negatives in every single row. So whether it be average yard, average expected points added, or percentages, he was below average in one of those, even though him and 16 were getting the same amount of rushes. So, we saw there was an immediate difference there. And then moving down into the guys that only had a few rushes. So number 11 was the quarterback. So for draws, he had one draw, which went well. Other than that, quarterback runs weren't super great for the team. Number 33, only 7 attempts. Looked like he was okay in man, okay in outside zone. Everything else, not so much. And then at the end here, we actually found a couple of kind of interesting trends, especially for the two rushers that had the ball the least. So for number 15 was pretty good in power, above average in every single category. And then for number 80, the receiver, his trick plays actually went really well. So kind of putting this all together, we wanted to kind of see which running backs were getting their what was their most attempted concept, and then what was their highest expected points added concept, to see if they were getting their highest points added concept the most. An interesting trend there was that only one out of the top three rushers were getting their highest expected points added concept the most, which was that second leading rusher there, while the other two, number 23 and number 16, were running inside zone and power respectively, when that was not their most effective run. And then the bottom three rushers were all being utilized the most with their highest expected points added concept. So that was definitely something we thought about when looking at our recommendations. And then moving on to defense.
All right, so I'm going to cover our defensive vulnerabilities. So the first way I wanted to approach this for the passing game was look at our defensive coverages and see what we were beaten most on. So what I found was that we were beaten most on cover 4 and cover 3. Cover 4 we were beat 6 times, and cover 3 we were beat 7 times. Cover 4 being the worst of the two, with an average yards given up of 49, and cover 3 not being great but being better with 31.9 on average. And then I wanted to check and see what kind of routes we were getting beat on. And I found that the seam and the skinny post and the jet routes were kind of the big ones that stood out, with skinny post giving up 54 yards on average, jets 48.5, and seams were a little bit less at 43.2, but we were beat on those the most. And then I combined the two to see where our largest vulnerabilities lied. And even though cover 4 and cover 3 were our worst packages, we were beat on a skinny post on cover 1 for 64 yards on one play. So that's the largest play that we gave up in 2022. And then most of the other ones at the top are cover 4 and some cover 3. But the skinny post and you see the jet and the seam are up there as well. Then I created a heat map to kind of show where our vulnerabilities were with each route and how many yards we were giving up. You can see that there's more squares in the cover 4 and the cover 3 rows, because we gave up more of those plays. And yellow in this graphic means that we gave up less average yards, and the red means that we gave up more. So if you look in the bottom left corner, you can see that skinny post on that cover 1 route that we were beaten. And then for our rush defense, I decided that it would probably be better to look at our personnel package rather than our pass coverage. So I looked at our base, nickel, and heavy packages, with our base giving up 14 explosive plays. Our nickel, so our lighter defense, was going to give up 42 plays, And then our heavy defenses where we had more box stacking, we only gave up one explosive rush play. And then I did the same thing as I did with the passes. I looked at which rushes we gave up more often, and by a lot, it was the inside zone and the outside zone with some counters close behind. Even though we gave up more yards on average to man rushes, we were beaten more frequently by inside zones and outside zones. And then I combined them again to see where our biggest vulnerabilities were. In our base and nickel packages, we were letting up a lot of man runs, and we were also giving up a big amount of runs in our nickel inside zone and our nickel outside zone. So our nickel was really getting beaten on the runs, which kind of makes more sense because nickel packages are usually heavier on the backside of the ball for pass plays. And then another heat map. You can see that one singular run in the middle in the heavy row that we were beaten on that one heavy set. And then across the bottom in our base heat map, you can see that one longest run in that man section. And then at the top in our nickel package, we were beaten not as bad, but we were still beaten most frequently in that.
Then I came up with some recommendations on both sides of the ball based on our results and just looking at, football analysis. So general offensive recommendations, both Jan and I found that the dolly formation led to explosives, so definitely more dolly formation, as well as more dab, triple, and don formations. Would have been good for the 2022 Temple team to get the ball to number 10, number 15, and number 80. They're the players with the highest explosive rates among players who had at least 24 touches. We'd recommend, of course, don't overuse it and use play action on every single drop back, but to increase play action in general, maybe like 5 or 10% more. More dot back set on passing plays, which makes sense both statistically and in a football sense, as it's a running look that should open up the play action that I was just mentioning. And then, based on the data, I think a general offensive strategy that the 2022 Temple team could have used is to, try to run more on first down and pass more on second and third downs. Looking specifically at runs, based on the data we found, we'd say, replace some inside zone attempts for number 23 and give him more counters instead. Limit number 28 to mostly inside zone. Increase the rushing attempts for number 16, especially with more draw and power concepts. When we're running man concepts, uh, take away some of the runs for number 23 and give them to number 16 or possibly even number 33. Decrease attempts overall for number 29 to run out of shotgun and especially the gun strong back set to run against nickel defenses and to get the ball in the hands of wide receivers number 15 and number 80 on plays like jet sweeps and wide receiver reverses. And then really just to focus our offensive run strategy in general on inside zone, counter, and power. In terms of offensive passing strategy, and I thought this section was really cool after we presented, I was thinking about it a little more. This section really like it incorporates our data for sure. And it also is like what an offensive coordinator would kind of suggest for these different defenses. So for attacking cover zero, we'd recommend, hitting the defense with the quick game on underneath routes, which makes sense if the defense is all out blitzing. You just try to, beat the cornerback in man-on-man coverage pretty quickly. Attacking cover one, a mix of deep shots down the field and horizontal quick routes, which also makes sense to attack a man defense. For attacking cover two, every kind of offense when they're attacking the cover two, they're looking for those holes within kind of behind the corner and in front of the safety, which is, a lot of people call it the honey hole shots. So especially like corners and overs would really work well, and even seams that kind of gets behind the linebacker and in front of the safety. All those would work well for attacking cover two. For cover three, a variety of vertical shots downfield. For cover four, or for attacking cover four, kind of deep horizontal breaking routes like overs and ins, as the four deep defensive backs are all dropping back vertically. If you're attacking them horizontally, it could create confusion and lead to an explosive play. And then attacking cover six, we saw basically in our data that hitting them with the screen game was working really well. Then defensive coverage strategy recommendations. We realize that we're getting beat for explosive plays by both the post and the skinny post in both cover three and cover four. So just like a general football sense, like we need to make sure that our cornerbacks and our safeties are passing off those routes effectively. We also noticed that we're getting beat by the seam route in cover one, cover two, and in cover four. So again, just general football sense, like we need to make sure our safeties are using proper eye discipline, playing inside to outside, and not hesitating to pull the trigger on a seam route in their zone. So really for both of these routes and both of these issues, I felt like we could try, or the 2022 Temple team could have tried to play a lot more cover three seam, which is also referred to as cover three buzz. In that defensive look, the buzz player should be in pretty good position to cover both post routes and seam routes, which are the two of our biggest, two of the biggest areas where we're getting killed. And then just kind of looking at that cover three buzz defensive look. If you look at the guy who's designated as the Roger Buzz, you know, both like the slot receiver and the outside receiver on his side, if they try to run a seam route or try to run a skinny post route, that Roger Buzz player really should, like, the routes kind of will run right into his zone, and he should be there to hopefully shut it down.